you for coming. I'm just going to introduce Allan, who is a wildlife photographer and cameraman. He's worked on shows like Blue Planet, Frozen Planet, and Planet Earth. And he's also just been recently awarded an OBE for promoting environmental awareness. So tonight, Doug is going to use his footage from some incredible places around the world to promote the importance of Cayman reefs, but within a global context, and also highlight the role that the healthy marine environments here play in marine environments around the world.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, follow that if you can. So these are the people who coughed up their support in order that I be here. So thank you to all of them. The theme was the Voyage of the Oceans, which, as Abby said, is I'm going to take you to the oceans far away, particularly the oceans north and south, and just talk about how the whole water ecosystem is connected and how... That's all right.
I'm trying to turn this off.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I've had that.
I've heard that before.
I've had that happen before. Don't worry. Anyway, we'll see how the oceans are all joined together. Now, I've just been on Little Cayman for a day. I must go back for longer because it's a very nice spot. And you have got, how many people dive here, by the way? Okay, most of you, good. Because Little Cayman off the wall is one of the nicest wall spots there are. But I also had a dive today, just off the shore off here. And of course, everybody goes for the coral reefs, but actually it's worth checking out the seabed and the seagrass meadows, because that's where you might find the seahorses, and that's where the conches are in bigger numbers. And it's also surprising, but a lot of sharks are happier over the sand than they are over the coral reefs. So, just think about, don't just think about coral reefs, is what I'm saying to you. And of course, you are rightly proud of the big effort that was made to conserve the Nassau grouper. I can't remember how long ago the concern was raised, but the numbers were considerably down to a few hundred. And then they discovered a spawning aggregation at the end of Little Cayman. And that's been looked after. Now apparently there's 7,000 or 8,000 Nassau groupers that gather there in the spawning season, and that's the biggest aggregation anywhere in the Caribbean. So it's, thanks to, you've got something really special there, and your work on green turtles is helping them too. But as I say, people like to dive the wall off Cayman. It is one of the best walls in the world. Walls aren't the easiest place to film, actually, because it's hard to get the right angle onto it, and everything's in mid-water as opposed to sort of on the ground. But they are spectacular places to go. But anyway, I don't want to spend much time in the Caymans, because I want to take you to where I spent a lot of my time, which is in the Antarctic and the Arctic. The Antarctic in particular, that's where I, in a way, didn't start diving, but early on in my multifaceted career, I worked as a diver and a biologist on this particular base in the Antarctic. Now, in the summer, this is all, this is where the coastline rise is round here, comes out round here and round here. And this is an island, and those other an island, and everything is open water between here and this other island. So, but in the winter it comes and it all freezes up. It's one of the furthest south post offices in the world. I think there's only one that's further south than it, and that's also a British base. And we dive there slightly differently. In the winter, we have to cut holes in the sea ice. We cut holes in the sea ice with a chainsaw, and you cut, if you make 2 cuts this way and then 3 cuts this way, you get the 2 free-floating blocks, which are then quite heavy, because a cubic metre of sea ice, if the sea ice is a metre thick and you make a cube of it, it weighs a ton. So it's too heavy to lift out, so you just sort of bounce it up and down and push it underneath to one side of the hole where it freezes up again, and you're fine. So that's how we make the dive holes. And one of the big things of diving in the Antarctic is the possibility of diving with big numbers of seals. One thing I'll keep saying to remind you is there are no polar bears in the Antarctic. Polar bears are in the Arctic. So, no, don't look sad like that. Polar bears in the Arctic, no polar bears in the Antarctic. So the animals are really different behaviour in the Antarctic. They're much more approachable. You would never get a group of Arctic seals coming around about a diver like that lot over there. We've got fish down there, but our fish have got antifreeze in their blood because the temperature of the seawater in the winter is minus 1.8 degrees centigrade, which is about 28 degrees Fahrenheit. It's slightly depressed below the freezing point of fresh water because of the salt. So in the winter, the water goes down to 28 degrees Fahrenheit, and in the summer, it gets up to as high as about 33 degrees Fahrenheit, just above freezing. So you don't get much of a temperature range, and it's always cold. And if you took a coral fish and dropped it into Antarctic waters, then it's basically its blood would just turn to a slurry of ice crystals. So these fish have got antifreeze in their blood, very similar to the antifreeze that you don't have to put in your cars. If you live somewhere cold, you'd put antifreeze, very similar. Anyway, and also we've got sharks in the polar regions too. This is actually an Arctic shark. This is a Greenland shark. But the difference between our Greenland sharks and your nurse sharks is ours are a little bit older, because the Greenland sharks can grow up to 450 years old, which is like the bowhead whale, also in the Arctic, which grows up to about 250 to 300 years old. The oldest living animals on the planet tend to be in the cold places. So we have got all different things. We've got the coral reefs, and well, not coral reefs, we've got very colourful reefs, particularly underneath the overhangs. Out on the flat surfaces, out in the flat seabed down to about maybe 60 feet, 70 feet, tends to get crunched by the icebergs that trundle across periodically. But if you get in underneath the overhangs where the ice scour can't get into, then you get lots of growth of soft corals, sponges, anemones, all this sort of thing. And in places, it's pretty spectacular.
800 miles from the South Pole, in the shadow of a smouldering Mount Erebus. Winter temperatures are a punishing minus 40. This, perhaps, is the last place you might expect to find marine life. Now it's the beginning of the polar spring, and for the first time in months, light reaches the sea beneath the ice. It's extremely cold and completely dark for much of the year, so conditions are not unlike those of the deep ocean. Yet, in McMurdo Sound, life flourishes. The creatures here grow extremely slowly, but that does mean they can reach a great age and great size. And they occur in surprisingly large numbers. Three-meter-long carnivorous nematine worms, red sea stars, and urchins carpet the sea floor. This monster worm will eat almost anything and is constantly scanning the sea floor for food.
So we'll come back to them in a minute, or a bit later on. But it's surprising how, that was a time lapse, by the way. They don't move as fast as that. Each shot, basically with the time lapse, you can take 4 hours of movement and compress it down to 10 or 15 seconds. So it took us a long time to shoot all these sequences, all the different shots. I think it was about 75 dives to put together that bit of a thing. Anyway, I've sometimes asked, what sort of person becomes a wildlife camera person? What do you need to be a wildlife photographer? Everybody says you must need a lot of patience, to which my response is, well, actually, you're being paid to be patient, so it's a bit different in that respect. But there are other things you need, and I think the main thing is you've always got to be ready for when that photograph presents itself. Sometimes you're not completely sure when the animals or when the situation will allow you to get the photograph that's going to really mean something. And a wee while ago I had a chance to talk about this to Russell Howard on the television, so here it is. We'd been out for a good long time looking for seals, didn't see any, and so the pilot said, we've got to go back, the weather's going down. So Sue said, well, look, I've got to, let me go and just have a pee before I get back in the helicopter. So she went round the back, dropped her survival suit, had a pee, came back on, and I was looking at her from the other seat, and as she was about to get in, she put on her survival suit and then pulled the hood up over, and I looked at her, and it was like this thing up and down, and she realised and I realised that what she'd done was actually peed in her suit and her food on. And I just had time to grab a quick photo. Oh, nice!
Brilliant. Well, that was an absolute delight. It was a pleasure meeting you. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
So that was Sue, my ex-wife. Let me tell you something. There's the Caymans, and we're going to go to the Arctic, so we're going to go up to the North Pole. Now, that's your typical atlas view, the map that gets opened. Maps don't give you a very good idea of what the world is really like. What you want to get is a globe, so you can look at it from all sorts of angles, and preferably a globe that isn't on a stand, because all the globes with stands put the support for the stand right through the North Pole, right through the South Pole, so you can never really get a good view of them. But if you were in a spacecraft and could go around and look down at the Arctic, you would see it's not perhaps as you expect. That's the North Pole in the centre. And what you realise is that the Arctic is actually a frozen ocean surrounded by land. So there is no land mass at the North Pole. It's a frozen ocean. It's surrounded by Greenland, Canada, Alaska, a whole lot of Russia, and then you come into Norway and etc. and things like that. But there is no land at the North Pole. It's very much a marine habitat. And on that ocean, on that frozen ocean, is one hairy, scary bear. And that, to my mind, is what makes the Arctic the most exciting place in the world, because polar bears are unique animals. They can see as well as we can. They're the biggest carnivore in the world. They're far bigger than any lion or any tiger. They can see as well as we can. They can hear as well as we can. They can smell a human from 1.5 miles away. So you could be out there on the ice looking around or having a cup of tea or what have you, and there could be a polar bear 1.5 miles away, well out of sight, who is smelling you. And if that polar bear thinks, interesting, smells a little bit like a seal, but I'll just go over and investigate, and who knows, I might try and attack it. So you've got to be on the lookout all the time. When I go up to the Arctic, I often work with the Inuit, which is the indigenous people who've lived up there for many, many generations, fly up to their communities, and then we go out onto the frozen sea ice to look for bears. So we go out and we often camp. This is sea ice. I'm standing on top of an iceberg. This is frozen sea. If I come back here in 3 months' time, I'll need a boat to get to this location. The mountains in the far distance are about 20 miles away, and we'll be lucky if we're between the camp and the mountains. We'll be lucky to see a couple of bears. There's never many. One bear in 15 square miles is doing pretty well. They're always solitary unless they have their cubs with them. But the males, keep away from all the other males, etc. They're very alone. And the best way to look for a bear is to go somewhere up high onto a piece of ice, and then the Inuit starts looking, scouring around with a telescope. If the bear's moving, then you stand a good chance of seeing it. If it's lying still, quiet, sleeping, that's much harder to see. This here is a female with its cubs. These cubs are about 1.5 years old. The cubs come out of the den and they stay with their mum for 2.5 years. And these cubs, this is a shot taken in April, so these cubs will have come out, they will have been born in January or December 1.5 years before, and they'll stay with their mum another 15 months or so after this picture was taken. Typical sea ice, you know, flattened areas, maybe bits of melt pools on top, lots of ridges in the sea ice, and this pair are going around looking for seals. They're looking for seals that they can hunt. So the seals, some of them, well, seals up in the Arctic live there, some of them at least live up in the high Arctic all year round, and they're capable of maintaining their breathing holes in the ice. The ice sort of shuffles around a bit. It's not all solid. It's like a big jigsaw, and it moves slightly with the wind and the currents, and the cracks open and close. And but these seals can maintain their breathing holes in the ice. They have their pups, some of them on the ice, and the pup will stay there for anywhere. Some of them can learn to swim quite quickly. Within 5 or 6 days, that pup will be able to get into the water and swim around with its mum. And the female, meantime, she can go up and down feeding as she wants underneath. But sometimes when the mum seal comes up, she'll leave a bit of a smell around about the hole that she's using. And when the polar bear is sniffing around, the polar bear will pick out that hole. And then depending on the strength of the smell, it will know whether that hole is being actively used. And if it is, the polar bear will settle down beside it and just wait and wait and wait. It looks as though it's sleeping. But when a seal comes back to the hole, if the seal is unwary, then the polar bear will grab it out of the hole and usually kills it with a quick bite to the back of the neck and then takes it off a few yards away from the hole. Now that seal there is definitely heavier than the biggest person in this room, without a doubt. But they just pick them up like, you know, so I'm just going for the shopping, I'll just wander away with this. They are immensely powerful. If I had a bear here, big bear here, would be 10 feet, 3 meters, 3.5 meters, from the tip of its tail, tip of its nose, to the rump of its tail. And the shoulders would be about this height, and it would be about 400 kilograms. Big animals. The big animal is really powerful. So it grabs the seal, takes it across the ice, and you know, and if it's hungry, there'll be nothing left after 15 minutes. If it's been good hunting, then it just tends to peel off the blubber. It'll eat the blubber, the fat underneath the skin, and leave the flesh and the bones. But if it's hungry, there'll be nothing left except a red stain on the ice. And so that's how the bear hunts in the spring, and then things become a bit difficult a bit harder for them as the ice breaks up. That's when the bears have to come on to land. Now there's a connection between here in the Arctic, or the Caribbean and the Arctic. If we've got the Silver Bank's a good, a shallow area to the north of the Dominican Republic. And there's our Arctic up there. Now if you've got the Silver Bank, there's just a little closer shot of it. It's a good place for humpback whales. Now if you're ever out, you will see them very occasionally off here, around here, very occasionally. But if you're ever at sea and you see that big, long pectoral flipper with a scalloped edge on it, and this flipper here can be 12 feet high, you know, as tall as this room almost. If you see a flipper like that, it has to be a humpback whale. No other whale has a flipper like that. And humpbacks are quite active on the surface. They often come up and they roll on their backs and they flipper themselves in the air, and they often show their tails. Quite often the tail will come up and it'll wave around. And the thing when you got a good view of humpback tail is that you see the underside of the tail. Every underside of every whale, humpback whale, is unique. No two whales have got the same black and white pattern underneath them. So over the years, people have built up a big catalogue of silverback, of humpbacks on the silverback, humpbacks elsewhere, and by matching tail flukes in different places, you can tell where they're going. But when we're swimming with them or trying to swim with them, we can also, if we find a friendly whale, we can actually go looking for that same whale by looking for that tail. And because a friendly whale one day is likely to be a friendly whale the next day. And that's the beauty of diving with, or being in the company of any mammals actually, but marine mammals, is that if you were a pod of humpback whales, there would be as many personalities among those whales as there are people in this room. You'd have the older, wiser, quieter ones that needed a different sort of approach. You'd have the adolescents who wanted to come and show you a wee bit maybe who was boss. You'd have the females with their calves being a little bit more protective, hanging back. And this particular female, she was just super curious, super friendly. We would go to the area where we thought we might find her. She wasn't always there, but if she was there, she recognised the noise of our boat. We just used to potter around. And if she recognised our boat, she would actually come over and she would hang off the front of the boat as if recognising the boat and waiting for me to go in the water. You could stand there on the right-hand side on the boat and look down, and you could see her with her nose up looking at you with the calf just beside her. This is her, and there's her calf just out there. And if you slipped in the water quietly, you'd find her just lying stationary underneath the boat, just waiting for you. And when you slip into the water, first of all, and then snorkel across towards her, quite almost always she would put her nose in the air. Now, the reason that they put their nose in the air, and they do this quite often when you're out whale watching somewhere, it's not uncommon to see a whale will come up close to the boat and stick its nose up. And the reason it does that is because it wants to see what's in front of it. Because a whale, when it's swimming normally, horizontally, where its eyes are, it can see below, but it can't see well in front, and it can't see above. So when it wants, if a whale is approaching the audience, it's going to go like that, so it can see better. And the next picture shows that off to a T. This is me approaching the whale, and this one over here. Now, this whale on here, you can see one eye there, and you can see one eye there, and you can even see how they're both zeroing in on me. So as I swim over, she wants to be reassured it's the same guy that, was okay to be with yesterday, so I'm fine with him today. So she would hold that position, and she would then come in, whoops, sorry, I'll let it run. She would come in closer, and you could have some fun. Humpback whales just look utterly amazing when you get close to them. They've got all these bumps over their head. You swim in and that eye just comes straight in on you, and you establish an utterly personal one-to-one contact with them through their eye. And as you hang at the surface or swim down to them, they will come up and meet you. They come up and meet you, they're full of curiosity, they're full of friendliness. There is just nothing like an intimate encounter with a humpback whale in good visibility. We are managing to make such profound changes in the ocean because of what we do. Yeah, we'll leave that just now. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing when you get in the water with a humpback whale. If humpbacks were dogs, they'd be Labradors. Put it that way. So if you get one that's interested in you, they will come, they will look, and just the same way as there's no verbal communication, but there's a lot of feedback in body language and things between you and them, and it's remarkable what you can feel when you're with them. Now, when you're on the Silver Banks, occasionally they will half breach, which is when they throw themselves entirely out of the water. Now again, some of you may be very good swimmers, but I can guarantee you will never be able to swim fast enough to throw your whole body out of the water and back in again. These humpback whales do it. 50 tons of whale with 2 strokes of its tail can throw itself clear of the water and come back in again. And they do that not only in the Silver Banks, but they also do that much further north, up in the Arctic. And we can go up there and we can see whales up there diving underneath close to the snow-capped mountains, and we can identify from their tail flukes that these are the same whales that people have seen down in the Caribbean. And many, many connections have been made. This is just a few of the tracks that have been noted over the years. Nowadays they're satellite tagging the whales, which means you can follow their position very accurately. But before they used to just rely on sightings of the flukes, matching of tail flukes. But we know that there's a significant number which hang around in the Caribbean during the winter, And then up in the summer, they head for the high Arctic where the feeding is good. So there you've got a connection between the Caribbean and the Arctic. And the point is these whales, you know, by looking after the reefs of the Caribbean, you give them a sanctuary to come back to. And it's one of these cases where you can definitely say that the waters of the Caribbean or the condition of the waters in the Caribbean and the Cayman play their part in the waters of the Arctic. And they provide, the fact it's healthy in between allows these whales to use this, to migrate between the Caribbean and the Arctic like this. And it's just, whales do this all over the world. There are different populations of whales. There's one population of whales in Tonga, which runs down from Tonga down to the Antarctic every year. And talking of that, let's go to the Antarctic. So the Arctic is this frozen ocean, North Pole right in the centre. You stand there, you're on top of a frozen ocean. Antarctica, the other end of the world, could not be more different because Antarctica is a frozen continent. There's supposed to be a picture came up, but never mind. Antarctica is a frozen continent, and it's really different. 15 million square kilometres, that's the same size as USA and Mexico combined. So it's a big place. 92% of it is covered with ice. 90% of the world's fresh water is frozen up in Antarctica. In the Arctic, there have been indigenous people all around the rim of the Arctic for at least 20 to 30,000 years. They seem to have migrated originally from Mongolia, spread up north and then spread up to the Arctic Ocean, spread east and west, crossed the Bering Straits about 20,000 years ago when there was a land bridge there, and from there spread out through North America, Canada, and on into Greenland. But there's never been any native indigenous people in the south because it's just too separate. The closest point of the Antarctic to anywhere else is here. From here to South America is 700 miles across the Drake Passage, but nothing has had it. You stand at the North Pole in the summer and you're standing on top of this frozen ocean and the ice underneath your feet is about 1.5 meters thick. You stand in the South Pole in the middle of summer and the ice underneath your feet is 2,900 meters thick. And it's so heavy that it actually depresses the Earth's crust underneath it. There is an awful lot of ice in Antarctica. 90% of the world's fresh water is locked up in Antarctica. And when you're there, they have done drills, they've taken drills all the way down through those 3,000 meters, at which point the ice at the bottom fell as snow nearly 1 million years ago. And if you extract the core is about this size, you extract it kilometre by meter from the bottom, and then go to the very bottom of it and take a thin slice, you have slicing into the atmosphere as it was when the snow turned into ice. And that's why we can get a long track record, almost 1 million years worth, showing what the CO2 levels were throughout the last 1 million years. And we can say that today it's higher than it has been for 1 million years. That's how we know what is sort of happening. Anyway, that's another beside the point. Anyway, so let's go to McMurdo. Cool place, American station. Have we got any Americans here? Bound to. Any Americans here? Okay, great. The good thing, this is the main American station in the Antarctic. Now you fly here from New Christchurch, which is down here. It's about 4.5 miles, 4.5 hours flight. Now, the good thing is that you don't fly, most other times when you fly around Antarctica, you fly in the same sort of size plane as you would fly to Little Cayman. Not when you go with the Americans. When you go with the Americans, you go with a real airplane. You go in a real airplane to the Antarctica. You go in a C-17, which flies out of Christchurch. And it takes about either 200 passengers or 200 scientists, what have you, or 200 passengers and no cargo, or in this case, 80 passengers and about 20 odd tons of cargo tucked into the back. And so the plane takes off and it flies down 4 hours down to the Antarctic. It skims down the side of the Antarctic continent, a few hundred miles inshore. And you can look down on the Transantarctic Mountains, and these mountains are about 3,500, 4,000 meters high. You only see the top 2,000 meters because the ice is 2,000 meters thick, covers the bottom of them. The North Pole is about 560, 600 miles straight up that way, and it's like you're climbing up, Antarctica is like a giant dome of ice that covers the continent. And then you come down and you begin to come down towards McMurdo, and you can see the airstrip down below you. Now, McMurdo airstrip is not on a gravel, it's not a gravel strip, it's not on rock, it's actually on the edge of a giant floating glacier. And when I say a giant floating glacier, this giant floating glacier is the same size as France. Okay, so we've got, it stretches way out that way, and we're about 15 miles back from the edge of the ice. The ice here is, the ice thickness here is about 1,000 feet, and the Americans have been out and they've bulldozed the snow off the top of the ice so that these planes can come in and land on the ice on their wheels. So they come in and land on their wheels on this blue ice strip, which the Americans have prepared. And it's still quite early in the year now, or early in the summer. It's about mid-October, so we've still got some daylight. It's about probably about minus 30, that sort of day. The plane might not even shut down. The back of it drops down, the cargo comes out, slides out onto the special cargo sledges, and then it gets taken with the people, it gets taken back to the base. You can look down on McMurdo Base, which is one of the bigger bases in the Antarctic. There's about 200 people live there in the summer, and it's a staging post for about 1,800 people who pass through. So 1,800 people come in, they land on the C-17, and then they take the Twin Otters, which will fly them to their field stations in different parts of Antarctica. But we were staying on McMurdo, and we were staying on McMurdo. They gave us our vehicle because we wanted to go out and to film the Weddell seals, which are over here. So the Weddell seals are the furthest south living seals in the world. They live all the way down to almost 79 degrees south, and they're able to live there because they're able to maintain their breathing holes in the ice. As I say, no polar bears in the Antarctic, so the Weddell seals are really quite approachable, very easygoing. They have their pups at this time of year, which is in the middle of October. Now, what astounds me about the pups is that the air temperature can be minus 40 at this time. Seals are warm-blooded like we are, so they've got an internal body temperature of about 39 degrees, 38.5, 39 degrees centigrade. So imagine that wee seal takes 20 seconds, let's say, to get born, to get squeezed from inside its mum to lying on the ice. It goes through an almost 80 degrees C temperature difference from inside its mum to lying on the ice. From plus 39 inside its mum to minus 40 lying on the ice, which is a colossal, I mean, that's more than most human beings can take in a lifetime. And that's what happens in birth. But you don't see many of them frozen or anything like that because they're born with a thick layer of blubber and fur, and within 10 minutes of being born, they're busy suckling at mum, and they're, you know, very rich milk, and they fatten up quickly. So in a month, it'll be a month, then they'll go into the sea, and then 3 weeks after that, they'll be totally weaned and left on their own. So 7 weeks from being born to being totally weaned and left to fend for themselves. So if you want to dive with them, you need to make a hole in the ice, in this 12 feet thick ice. And once again, the Americans with their big equipment come to the rescue. You just need a wee bit of gear equipment. So you take your D9, and your bulldozer and your hole driller and your dive hut. And you set out from McMurdo, and when you've got to where you want to drill the holes, you put the business end on the auger, you swing it upright, and you drill a hole down through the ice. Then you bring your dive hut over into position, and you get your gear out of the vehicle into the dive hut, and there's the setup. So inside, you've lifted a panel in the floor, so this is the hole. So the water in here is minus 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside it's as warm as this room because you've got a big radiator behind you and it's all insulated. Outside it's maybe minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit, that sort of thing, you know, pretty cold. But it's a great diving setup. You could make up to 3 dives a day. Dive for an hour, come out for 3 hours, rewarm, back in for another hour, etc. It's pretty simple stuff we've got in terms of safety. We don't dive with pony bottles. We dive just with a single cylinder, but it's a Y valve on the top with an independent regulator in each branch of the Y. And you just breathe out of one. The worst that can happen will be your first stage will freeze up, in which case you get given too much air, not enough. Doesn't cut off, you start free flowing. They've got a little modification that allows you to switch off the air supply there to stop the free flow. Then you can just pick up the other one, back to the hole, and it's fine. So it's really quite simple. Obviously, we're all diving in dry suits, etc. And so you get yourself right there. You have this close-up of the Y. So this is after a dive. After the dive, often the first stage is completely covered in ice, but it's fine. It works underneath it. So about 1 in 1,000 dives, they reckon, has a free flow. So really, you know, even if you're diving intensively, you don't really expect a free flow every 4 or 5 seasons of diving down there. These are Sherwoods, by the way, and they insist on everyone. No one takes their own regulator. They just give them all the same Sherwoods because they have been proven to be the most reliable under the cold. So you get all your stuff together, get handy the camera, drop into the water, and you can go down in underneath the ice. Now, because it's good, because there's no currents in this area, because we all know what we're doing, we can dive without safety lines. And the other reason we can dive without safety lines is because you've all dived, you've all seen coral reefs. Well, you'll know that the good visibility on a coral reef is maybe 100, 150 feet. Visibility under here is about 800 feet. 800 feet. It is the most gin clear water anywhere. And that's partly because it's been underneath the sea ice for the last 8 months. So there's no swell, very little light, no plankton, no swell to stir up the bottom. And it's just, that's how clear it is. So it makes for some pretty fantastic diving, and you can find the Weddell seals by swimming along just underneath the surface, and you'll find them up near their breathing holes. These seals can be 1 minute, they'll be on the surface, and then within 2 minutes they're down at 800 meters feeding. They feed down to 800 meters deep. They can hold their breath for up to an hour, although that tends to be on shallower dives. But on feeding dives, they'll be 20 minutes, half an hour, reaching a maximum depth of 800 meters in the darkness, where they come back with fish that are half as long as they are. Pretty amazing. They find them by detecting the wake. These fish leave a little wake as they swim by, and with the sensitive whiskers on the Weddell seal, they can just detect the swirly current in the water, and they can detect the movement gradient of the water across their face, and they'll swim across the wake like this, zeroing in on the fish, and then poof, when they get it, they take it.
What kind of fish would be down there?
Antarctica.
What
Sorry?
kind of fish would be
Fish, it's a thing called a toothfish, which is big fish. Anyway, let's see if this thing plays.
Antarctica. The Earth's coldest continent, the one that is most hostile to life. Here, 1,300 kilometers from the South Pole, it's 40 degrees below zero. Of all the millions of species of animals on Earth, only one can live here permanently. A Weddell seal. She can survive because she can dive below the ice. Here she is protected from the storms above, and here too she can find food. But she is a mammal, and she has to breathe air. So she has to keep a lifeline open to the world above the ice. Not only for her, but now for her newborn pup. She encourages him to take his first plunge, but hardly surprisingly, he's not keen. Now, guided by his mother, he has to learn how to hunt underwater and to find his way back through the maze to his hole in the ice.
So yeah, it makes a huge difference, the absence of polar bears. They're lovely. And in fact, the visibility is so clear, you can hear them. They make a whistling noise, kind of. And then the males, they kind of grunt. And you can hear this way out into the distance, and you look out and you can see this tiny little thing way out, 600 feet away. And you can hear it, and then it turns, and then just with 3 or 4 little flicks of its tail, it comes at you. And then it's just there and looking at you. And you think, where have you been? Have you been down 800 metres? Where's the fish? I've never actually seen one bring a fish back to the surface. Other people have. But, and then they take their pups in the water, as I say, when the pups are about a month old. And over the next 3 weeks, the pups somehow learn to swim and to dive and to look for their own food and all the rest of it. And there they are, they carry on. So everything's fine in the world of the little Weddell seal, except for the fact that these guys are around. Now, this next sequence, I first heard about this behaviour in 1976, and I finally filmed it in 2009, and I filmed it off the Antarctic Peninsula down this side. So McMurdo's over here, and we're now right over the other side. This is the Drake Passage, and we're now down this side of the peninsula, and we're going to look for what happens down there. So this side of the peninsula, lots of ice on that side, even through the summer, which is what we're looking for. And we're down here, we've taken this boat. This is a 60 feet long boat crewed by a very experienced French skipper, with whom I've had many adventures. And because we're going to be filming from a boat, we took 2 stabilised systems, because when you're filming from a boat, no matter how calm it is, the boat's always rocking or pitching, etc. So just to plant a tripod on the deck on a long lens, it would just be dancing all over the place. So this thing here has a standard, it's normal equipment from here up, and then below from there, between the tripod legs and the tripod head, you've got 2 gyros at 90 degrees to each other, spinning at high speed. And they will account for the pitch and the roll of the camera up above, so that while the ship moves around, the camera is held pretty stable. This is just an even more sophisticated version of it. This one usually mounts on a helicopter, and that one on the far side has a longer zoom lens on it, and even finer stabilising. From the right-hand side, the image comes down a cable into a monitor and then a control panel. And with that control panel, you can pan and tilt the camera, you can pan it, you can tilt it up and down, you can zoom in and out, you can change the frame speeds. You can do everything you can with a normal camera. There's the joystick over here. You can do all of that using the monitor to work out what you're filming. So between these 2 systems, we had 2 partly as a backup, but also when we went down, we didn't know if we were going to see this behaviour, but also we didn't know how many times we would see it. So we had a deal that the first time we see it, topside, the other camera stays on the sort of wide shots, while I, with the other one, will pick up the more close-up shots, because I've got a longer lens. So between the pair of us, we should get a sequence, because a sequence is all about different shot sizes. So we went down, and it wasn't too much problem. We'd been down before filming killer whales doing other things, so we knew there wasn't a problem following the killer whales in this boat. We were down there 24-hour daylight, so we could follow them all the time. And the killer whales did the usual sort of thing. They often came in close to the boat and would spy hop. See there, it's got its head up and it's looking out and having a round, checking out the boat and things. And we were able to use that sort of behaviour. We just did some shots of the whales just swimming along using a remote camera on the end of that pole. So Doug Anderson has a remote camera on the end of the pole. Catherine, the producer, is here looking at the monitor, saying to Doug, left a bit, right a bit, hold it, let the animals go, etc. And Dion in the back, he's driving the boat as best he can. So we were picking up shots of them travelling and things, but travelling wasn't giving us what we wanted. And then finally, one pod we were following headed into the pack ice, and the behaviour changed. The pack split up, and you could see orca heads sticking up above the ice, and it would seem to us it was obvious that they were looking for something, and that was actually the case.
Remnants of the sea ice are occupied by sunbathing seals that have been here all winter. But new arrivals are following the retreating ice age, and they have come here to hunt. Killer whales, the ocean's top predator. Killers are like wolves, for they will hunt animals far larger than themselves. But even smaller prey are a problem if you can't reach them. The solution is teamwork. Swimming in perfect formation, they flick their tails in unison and create a wave that cracks the ice. They regroup and assess the damage. A more powerful wave is needed. The ice floe is breaking up. Now they are close enough to get a good look at their target. The seal is a crab eater, sharp-toothed and feisty, not their favourite. The wolves of the sea move on in search of easier quarry. A whittle seal, that's better. These are more docile and easier to tackle. The pod stays close together and travels silently. This time, they unleash a far more powerful wave, and with astonishing accuracy. These big waves are not intended to break the ice, but to knock the prey into the water, and they rarely fail. Is now where the killers want it. But the hunt is far from over. They need to grab their prey by the tail while avoiding its snapping jaws. Only then will they be able to pull it down and drown it. Side swipes create violent underwater turbulence, a new tactic. Bubbles gives cover for others to lunge at the seal's tail. Somehow the seal manages to reach a tiny ice floe. The killers could easily grab it, but now this seems to have become a game. The seal's life hangs on a roll of the ice. Yet again, the pod joins forces to dislodge the seal. The seal sees a chance to escape. Exhausted, it no longer has the energy to pull itself to safety. And the killers are moving in. Game over.
I'm afraid we never saw one get away. When they picked one out, that was it. It was toast. But think of all the decisions those killer whales have to make. They've got to decide, let's go hunting. They've got to split up. They've got to look. They've got to decide which of the seals is worth attacking. Because leopard seals, fur seals, crab-eater seals, they're too bendy and twisty. There's too high a chance of getting injured. Weddell seals are fatter and slower, better, more worth catching, easier to catch. Okay, who's going to make the wave? Who's going to wait on the other side? Who's going to do all this? And they're deciding all this. And one finds the seal. The other thing is that we were trying to record the underwater sounds, and we never heard any underwater sounds made by the killer whales while they were hunting. So how one found one and then got the other ones over to it, we don't know how they managed to do that. Certainly we couldn't hear them. So anyway, it's just part of, sometimes people ask me, do you ever feel sorry for the animals that you're watching? And I have to say, no, if I'm privileged enough to see something like that, my main job is to film it, but the main job also is not to interfere with whatever is going to happen. Killer whales are entitled to their meal as much as a polar bear is, as much as a seal is entitled to escape, possibly. But the main thing is just, to enjoy the fact that you're there and seeing this sort of thing that so few other people have had the chance of doing. The thing is that those killer whales and other animals, and the polar bears in the north, are very much threatened by climate change. That particular pod of killer whales that does that hunting, there's only one pod that's ever been seen doing that. And the problem is where they are hunting, there is less ice in that part of the Antarctic every year. And scientists are unclear what will happen, whether the killer whales will go south and follow the ice edge south and carry on that behaviour, or whether they'll hunt differently because they stick to the same area but there isn't the same amount of ice. And the reason is because climate change is happening. Now, I would like to see everybody leave here and not talk anymore about climate change, because change is what we do with our underpants or something like that, whereas when something breaks down, then it's your job to fix it. Climate breakdown is a much stronger word. Now, we know why the climate is getting warmer, why it's breaking down. It's because of increasing CO2. Since 1955, the CO2 has been measured every single day at 2 points on the Earth's surface, the South Pole and the top of Mauna Loa volcano in Hawaii. Two places that you'd think, that have been taken to be the purest air on Earth. So every day it's been measured, and every year it's gone up and up and up. And now, back in 1st of November, it was 425. Back in 1955, when they started, it was about 305 parts per million down there. And all that increase is because of what we have pumped into the air. And we can see that reflected. We know from the physics was proved back in the 1870s, that if you increase the CO2 in the air, then you get this greenhouse effect, as they call it, and therefore the air warms. So again, when we plot the average global temperatures through the year since the mid-40s, we can see it just on a steady increase. And in 2024, we ended at 1.6 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial average. I don't know what 2025 will be. It may be just above 1.5, it may be slightly below. Anyway, the trend is pretty obviously upwards. And because the atmosphere warms, therefore it stands to reason that the earth, the water, the seas are going to warm too, because a warm atmosphere percolates into the sea. And in fact, if it wasn't for the sea, if we didn't have the vast volume of water that we have on the planet, which is sucking in, which is absorbing all this heat, if we didn't have the oceans, the amount of CO2 we have put out would have increased the atmosphere temperature by closer to 9 degrees centigrade. So we've got the oceans to thank for the fact that we've only seen 1.5 degrees centigrade rise, rather than total doom of 9 degrees. But warming the ocean in itself produces a problem, particularly up in the poles. We've been looking down at the poles for many years and began looking at them back in '84. And when you look at the Arctic Ocean on the 22nd of September, 22nd of September is the nominal date chosen by scientists when the ice cover in the Arctic is at a minimum, 22nd of September. So back in 22nd of September 1984, 7.2 million square kilometres of ice covered the Arctic Ocean. If we come forward 40 years later to 2024, we've only got 4.3 million square kilometres. This whole area of ice here that used to be ice, used to be workable ice for a polar bear in September 40 years ago, no longer exists. You just go back if I can find it. So there's how it was. There's how it was in '84, all this area here. Well, that now doesn't exist anymore. So that's putting quite a pressure onto polar bears, because when a polar bear comes out of his den, the polar bear with the young cub, she wants to have good sea ice in the spring to get out there and to hunt the seals. But because of the increased temperature, that sea ice in the spring is thinner, it breaks up earlier, and it doesn't freeze until later. So she basically doesn't have the same hunting opportunities as she had before. And we can see this reflected in the increased mortality of young cubs. We've had this sort of stuff has been studied since the mid 60s. So it's a long-term trend. So we can say it's not just a flash in the pan, so to speak. So they're vulnerable. So you could say the old polar bear is definitely walking into a rather uncertain future. At the moment, there's still the same number of polar bears roughly as there's always been, about 25,000. But if the sea ice continues, then they probably will, first thing that will happen is that they won't be spread all around the Arctic. You find them all round about the Arctic, not in the same densities, but areas like off Alaska and that part where a lot of the sea ice disappeared, it might be that polar bears will abandon that as a habitat, because polar bears are effectively marine mammals. A marine mammal is like a whale, is a marine mammal. The difference between a whale and a polar bear is that a whale lives in the sea and a polar bear lives on top of it. And when you mess around with it on top, i.e. the ice, then it's like chopping down the jungle round about, orangutans, and they just have got no habitat left to live on. So it's habitat loss that's crucial for the polar bear. But of course, when you affect the ice in the Arctic, you also affect the seals, which the polar bear feeds on, and the fish distribution, and a whole lot of other stuff that we struggle to contend with. Down in the Antarctic, the one that we're concerned about now are the emperor penguins. Now, emperor penguins are the biggest of the penguins. If I had an emp here, he'd be about that high. And emperor penguins are scattered all the way around, colonies are all the way around the perimeter of the Antarctic. And there's a lot of emperor penguins. I think there's about 250,000 pairs in these colonies all around about the Antarctic. But the key thing with emps is that they don't breed on land, they breed on the sea ice. They breed on the sea ice. They don't come back to begin breeding until the end of the summer and the beginning of the autumn, when the sea starts to freeze. 2 months before this shot was taken, this was all water. But this is in April, the sea is frozen, and these emperor penguins are going to live on this ice until December, when it begins to break up again. So they have this long breeding cycle. They're very big, so all the other penguins can squeeze their whole breeding cycle into an Antarctic summer. For the emperor penguins' chicks to be ready to go to sea in the summer, they need to start breeding at the start of the winter. So they all come together. These are males and females together. You can't tell them apart, but they can, because the female produces a single egg, and within 24 hours of laying, she gives it to the male. She puts it on the ice and rolls it across and says, "Here, this is your job to look after this. I have used a lot of energy producing this big single yolky egg. I'm now going off to the open water, which might be 100 miles away. I'm going to go there for 2 months. I'm going to feed up, recover my energy for 2 months. You have to look after that egg." Now, he has no nest to put it on. It's this frozen sea ice. So he has to put it onto his feet, tucks it between his legs, and keeps it in between his legs where there's a featherless patch of skin called a brood pouch. And he shuffles around, they shuffle around like this with the egg on their feet for 2 months until the female comes back. It's bitterly cold, and in the coldest of winter, the males, these are all males with eggs, they huddle together. And by huddling together, they can survive through the darkness, the wind, and the minus 60 degrees centigrade temperature that they sometimes get at some colonies. It is bitterly cold. But by huddling together, the ones in the middle are kept much warmer. Some scientists did an experiment. They put some little thermometers, they glued thermometers to the base down on penguins down here. And these satellite tags, they recorded the air temperature and the position. So these guys could go down, and if they got a good fix in real time, they would be able to say, I've got a fix on a penguin, and he's over here, he's in the middle of this pile, because I've got a position to him correct to a couple of meters. And they found that the ones on the outside might be recording -40, -50. The guys on the inside were +20. That's how warm it was on the inside of a huddle. So they don't all take their turn in the huddle, because these guys here, the wind is blowing this way, and these guys here are sort of shuffle and pushing their way into the middle, and the ones on this side are kind of getting pushed out that way, and they'll come round. And so it's not like they take their turns, but they get a turn in the middle. So again, you don't see many, because they've got this instinctive behaviour, you don't see many of them dying of hypothermia. Beginning of August, the egg finally hatches, the little chick comes out. And that chick over the next 3-4 months will slowly get bigger. They're born, when they hatch, they're covered with these grey, downy, fluffy feathers, which are great for keeping them warm, but they're not waterproof. So as they grow up, the male and female, the mum and dad, they go to and fro the open water, bringing back food, and the chick slowly grows from, this height when it's hatched. It slowly grows until they might be about this sort of height. And they walk around, and they've got their little flippers, sort of rubbery flippers, and they're flipping them around and getting their strength up, and all the rest of it. And then finally, by about the beginning of December, they're beginning to get ready to go to sea. They're fledging. So you can see they're beginning, some of them, like this one here, he's lost a lot of his brown, a lot of his grey fluffy feathers, and he's got the waterproof plumage underneath. This guy's even further ahead. And only when they've lost almost all of their downy feathers, then they will go into the water. And that's the breeding cycle complete. And here's a shot there. Look, that's a real penguin. It just so happened for one day when I saw it that it was fledging in the shape of a perfect heart on its chest. And I took the picture because, I knew it would impress people like you. And their conservation, however, status has gone from okay to nearly threatened. The reason is, if that Antarctic sea ice starts to behave like the Arctic sea ice, breaking up early or not forming until later, then these penguins will have nowhere to go, because they need 9 months of sea ice to carry out their breeding cycle. And if that ice breaks up, not by around Christmas, let's say, if it starts breaking up in the middle of November, then you get more or less 100% mortality of the chicks. Now, it's happened in 1 or 2 colonies, but it's probably always happened in some colonies, because sea ice is a dynamic environment. But there was less sea ice less winter sea ice, less summer sea ice, in the Antarctic last summer than ever before. So if that's the beginnings of a trend, then we have to hope that the emperor won't carry on and affect the emperor penguins, because they have a very unique and unusual breeding cycle. Again, they probably, there are bits of the ice that will probably be okay, but we could see their population numbers absolutely plummet from healthy to what they call near threatened. So really, we should be looking around at climate change. Climate change is affecting everybody all around the globe, and climate change is often driven by what happens at sea. Coral bleaching, for example, is just because the sea gets too warm. Hurricanes gain their strength from warmer seas and warmer atmosphere. There's more energy in our system that a hurricane can feed off. You just had Melissa. America suffered really badly from Katrina, obviously. UK is suffering by getting bigger storms and bigger storm surges in places like that. And then there are certain populations of the world where the climate is changing such that food and famine are almost following on. So it's something that we've got to get a hold of. And Jane Goodall, the big primatologist who died just this year, she made a very simple statement, which is nonetheless true. She said, everybody, what you do makes the difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. And some people don't, make a decision which is actually a bad decision on behalf of the environment, and other people make better decisions. It's good, for example, it's great that the Caymans have got a plan in place to replace their fossil fuel burning power station by getting everybody into solar panels, solar arrays, and then also possibly going the way of Bonaire. Bonaire down in the Netherlands and down of Venezuela. Bonaire is a completely green island. They get all the energy they need from wind turbines and solar. And that's the way that, Caymans could go, and the sooner the better, really. I know it's expensive, and I know all the rest of it, but and there would be some who would say, look, we're a tiny nation, what difference does it make? It's about setting an example. Big nations can actually be embarrassed to doing things that they wouldn't do otherwise if they see other people doing it. And that goes at the national level and goes at the personal level. So we could do it. But I also thought, let's get real, what can we all do ourselves to help our own personal footprint? And I thought about it and I thought, AI, that's definitely the key of it. Now, AI is coming charging in, but I don't know if you know, but AI, if you go on Google and ask it a simple question, which 18 months ago you would have asked Google, if you go on Google and choose the AI answer to answer that same question, then back at the data center, that AI answer will take 50 times more power than the old Google answer took. AI is extremely heavy on power. To produce 4 high-resolution AI-generated images on your computer uses the same power as 2.5 times phone chargers, 2.5 charges of your phone. So you can see the way AI is zooming in that there's going to be a massive power spike required across the world, and the only way to get that, to supply that power for that spike, is going to be bringing more of the old style non-renewable energies back online. So I would urge you, don't use AI to make even better cat videos of it, But, don't think about how you use it. Don't go on to Sora and play around with President Trump and make him look like somebody sensible. But I did find out that ChatGPT is interesting. ChatGPT, although it's 50 times more powerful, if ChatGPT can give you the answer in a minute, something that would take you an afternoon to work out on your computer, then actually you will have used more energy in that afternoon tapping at your computer than AI will have used. The challenge, I think, especially for younger people, is what sort of thinking has that ChatGPT saved you? And I think it's going to be interesting how people learn in different ways. But there's one way in which we could all go and save it. This is just to finish off. Have a look at your phones. I've had a look at my phone. Look how many pictures I've got of my dog and how many sunsets I've taken. And sometimes 4 or 5 pictures of the same sunset. And I look back through my phone and I have about 8,000 pictures, of which I probably value about 250. So I'm in the process of going through my 8,000 pictures and ditching the rest, because those 8,000 pictures are not on my phone, they are on the cloud, and they are taking an enormous amount of energy to maintain on the cloud. And when you multiply my pictures by all your unlooked at pictures, by all the unlooked at pictures that the tourists take when they come here, that are going in all over the world, there is a massive amount of energy being used to store pictures which really are more worthless where they are. So I would urge everyone, do the planet a favour. There are lots of advice on the internet as to programs you can use to find the pictures that you want. Go through your pictures. You won't do it in a day. It'll probably take you several weeks of steady work. But at the end, you will have 250, maybe 400 pictures that you really value, that you can access, that you can look at, that you can show your friends, instead of the 5,000 to 10,000 that you have on your phone and you don't know what the hell's there. Make a selection of your favourites and please delete the rest. That would be the biggest thing you could do to minimise your carbon footprint. And you would do yourself a favour, because ask yourself honestly, amongst all how many, life's too short to go, it's here somewhere, hold on. Anyway, because we live on this fantastic planet, don't we? It's the only one we've got. It's the only one like it anywhere in the solar system. I'm willing to bet anywhere within conceivable distance. So I would urge you, therefore, to be passionate about the planet, to be engaged with the planet, and to be connected to the planet, however you can, however you want, whether it's diving, whether it's just going out and enjoying it, etc. But think about it, because this picture here is one view that everybody sees of the world. But actually, if you spun the world around, you'd see that we don't really live on planet Earth. We live on planet water. And water is a far bigger, more important component. There's a far bigger living space in the water than there is in the atmosphere and on land. So it really behoves us to think about the planet, think about what we can do for the water of the planet, because the waters of the planet, from the Caribbean to the Arctic, from the Caribbean to the Antarctic, they're all connected. A whale could, if it had if it was thermally insulated, could swim from the Caymans anywhere in any ocean. All the oceans are connected. Unlike land, you can't go all across the land staying connected to the land. You can't go from North and South America to Russia, to the mainland, because you've got the Bering Straits in the way. And there are big chunks of the world that you can't move around. The world is connected by water, so we have to look after it. So be connected with all those things and be kind to the Caymans, because if you're kind to the Caymans, then you will automatically be kind to the whole of the rest of the planet. And what you do makes a difference, and you just have to choose what kind of a difference you want to make. So that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, I'll get the lights so you can see me and ask for. Oh, cheers. Just flick them both up. Okay, so I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone's got. There are some pictures over there that I can sign and say, oh, great Christmas presents. Somebody was buying their Christmas presents already. Yeah, that's a good idea. So there's some pictures over there. But if anyone's got any questions about anything at all, yes, sir.
How did you start your career?
How did I start my career? Okay, very briefly. I was lucky enough to go to the Mediterranean with my folks in 1961 when I was 10. And it was easy to pick up a snorkel and mask, so I started snorkeling and things. Then through teenage years, I read Cousteau's book, The Silent World, and other adventurous stuff on the about the oceans. Didn't have a television set at that point, so I had to read about everything. That urged me in the direction of doing a degree in marine biology and also taking up diving, so I did the two almost simultaneously. Went to university at 18, did a degree in marine biology, did a lot of diving while I was doing it, and then decided while I was doing it, I didn't want to be a scientist, I wanted to dive. I wanted to combine diving, expeditions, adventure, and at that time it was slightly easier. Not nearly so many divers, scientists dive, so I felt it was a bit of a niche there. Anyway, I did a couple of expeditions and then got the big break going to the Antarctic, to that place that I mentioned. So I went to the Antarctic in 1976 as a diver, doing support work for the marine biologists on that particular station. I did one winter, then I went back, came back to UK, worked as a commercial diver to make some money, bought some better camera equipment, went back down again. I did 2 winters. At the end of those 2 winters, David Attenborough appeared on with a very small film crew on our station, and I gave him and his crew a hand for a couple of days, just around the island so they didn't fall in crevasses and walk over scientific experiments. And by the end of that time, it wasn't so much I was attracted to the idea of wildlife filming, it was more, I knew from my time in down south that I enjoyed being in small groups of people, for long times. That was a good, exciting stuff. And these 4 people, they were having such a good time, and they were doing something worthwhile, that it was really that impressed me first. And then anyway, I spoke to David, and we spoke about freelance wildlife filming and things. I had a chance to go back to the Antarctic, to a different base where there were emperor penguins. I had a chance to winter with them. I bought a camera, did some stuff, sold it to the BBC, and the rest is history. So I was 31 years old when I met David. By the time I was 35, I was making a full-time living from filming. And that lasted for 35, 40 years. So that was it. I mean, it's in a way, the diving was at the centre, and I bolted all the other things on. The diving, then the marine biology, then the expeditions, then the photography, then the wildlife filming, and then backed it up with writing, outreach, all the other stuff. You've got to have lots of strings to your bow if you're going to be successful as a freelance, I think. So that's the way it worked for me. Yeah. I don't think I'm not sure you could do that nowadays. The business has moved into different places. But I think if you want to be a wildlife filmmaker, if you really want to, you can do it. The fire will be in you already. It's just a matter of finding your way, through the maze of opportunities to finally get it. And when I got it, I think if I'd met David on a coral reef, it might have been different because, there's heaps of underwater coral divers, but there was only me that could dive under the ice and do all that sort of stuff and cope with the cold. So it was a bit of a, stick to your strengths, so to speak. And that's why I've done a disproportionate amount of cold stuff in my career rather than places like this. Yes?
How did your face not freeze in the days?
Well, it's a wee bit you get accustomed to it.
When you're on there, you got
We don't. I mean, I dive dry, but actually, nowadays you can, even dry suits have moved on. You can get, heated undersuits and things like that you can control with a panel on your front. You get heated gloves. But no. You get accustomed to it. But you need to be, I know people who are very good divers and they've gone into the cold and they just get cold. You need to have, the luck of the draw gives you, good circulation to your extremities. If you don't have that, then you're going to get cold. It's harder. But wildlife filming or being in nature a lot involves an element of discomfort. You're going to be at the same time, we have two sayings. Any fool can be uncomfortable. That's the first thing. So a lot of it is clothing and experience to know how to prepare your equipment and things. But you have to go prepared for some discomfort. And I would rather feel my feet getting numb than be sitting up in some jungle canopy being eaten alive by sweat bees. Or facing the leeches in the jungle or stuff like that. It's kind of each to his own. Yes.
I have two questions. One, so do you dive just on air or do you dive on a mix? Or?
It depends. It depends where you're diving. I've done rebreathers and all this sort of stuff. It's really horses for courses. Rebreathers are good, but you can't just finish the end of the day and throw it in the corner and expect it to work again. And they're fiddly they need to be prepared. You can't just sit there with scuba and then you're in the water and back out again. So it's horses for courses. Sometimes I'm diving a lot on mixes as such, but if I had the option and I was doing a lot of dives, I would certainly look at nitrox. And it's great if you can get nitrox. So you breathe nitrox but work on air tables. That gives you super safety, and the nitrox component doesn't make you so tired between dives. That kind of thing. But it depends. Nitrox, some places you still can't get it.
Okay. And my second question was, have you ever had a particularly scary encounter with a polar bear? You're dead.
No, there are. You need to keep your wits about you. But the worst thing was a walrus. I was snorkeling off the ice edge up in Canada, and I was just snorkeling. I didn't have scuba gear on, and I was trying to get shots of diving birds. They would flutter around the surface, and guillemots it was, or murs as you call, dives underneath. So I just seen one group disappear, and I was just treading water looking if there was another group, and suddenly something wrapped. It was like someone had wrapped their arms around my thighs. And this story takes longer to tell than it took to happen. So I felt this thing around my thighs, and I looked down, and literally here there was the head of a walrus. So I swung the camera around and just kind of pushed on its head, and it let go and swam away about as far away as you. And it looked at me, and then it turned and headed off. And what had happened was it had confused me for a sleeping seal. Walrus usually feed on clams and things on the muddy bottoms, but occasionally they'll decide to have a seal. And the seal that they find easiest to get is a sleeping seal, because when a seal goes to sleep, it bobs up and down in the water, just like a bottle, just with its nose showing. So when a walrus is hunting a seal in the water, it swims around on the top, looking for these little bobbing heads. And me treading water, looking around, must have looked like a seal. And then they dive down underneath, and of course they look up and they can see everything. And they come up and grab. And either Inuit who have seen, Inuit guides who I spoke to afterwards, who've seen walrus take seals, they seem to either they prefer to take them high in the body and pin the flippers to their side, and then they kind of pull them between their tusks, which breaks all the bones in the seal's body, like that, crunchy, crunchy. Or they take them down, underwater and just drown them. Or the third way is that sometimes if you take them high on the body, and it's a big walrus and a small seal, then this puts the walrus head up here, and they put their head down, put their lips down against the seal's head, and as the internet said, it's just like the seal's head explodes. They just suck its brains out. So it's so sorry. So I was, you know, it was the one thing. It was a total surprise, perfect attack. And if its response to being pushed on the head had been to hold on and go down, that'd have been it. So that's the worst. There are other situations that you get into where you definitely, you know, it's time to leave the water, or, you know, that can because the sea conditions have gone bad, or because the animal is showing you that it doesn't want you around anymore. You know, you just learn to read those things. And usually if you're in tune, you can read those times and avoid the main thing. Because I don't have any time for people who, you know, go free swimming with great white sharks if there's someone close by with a power head ready to kill the shark if it gets too close. And likewise, if you're working around polar bears, you know, we have to carry rifles, but I've never had to shoot a rifle in earnest, because we also have rifles that fire cracker shells, rubber bullets, bear spray, all sorts of stuff, which is non-lethal deterrents, chase them away. And that's, you know, you want to use that because you have a big responsibility to your subject, not to hurt it just because you're there. So, yeah, but it makes for exciting. That's why polar bears are good. That's why polar bears are good and exciting. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Where would you say the best place for someone like us to see polar bears is?
A
And
bit.
at what time of year?
Well, they're pretty reliable up in Churchill. Everybody says Churchill, but you know, it's a natural population of bears in Churchill. They gather there in order to, because that's where the ice forms and they head out. So it's a pretty touristy affair, you know, but you go out in big trucks, but you will see them doing natural behaviour and all the rest, and behaviour wrestling with each other that they don't do elsewhere. They only do it in that particular space. There's also there's a place, if you Google it, I'm not sure what you Google, but there are trips that are quite expensive, but quite reliable, that go out of a place I think called Seal River, and they tend to go in the spring, and they've got a handle on where some cubs, that's where some dens are, and you go out with them and you stand a chance of seeing the cubs coming out of the den. And then there are other trips, I think. There's a company called Arctic Kingdom, which does some polar bear trips. The other place you can go in the spring, although it's getting harder now, is Svalbard. It's mostly Canada that people tend to go, but Arctic Kingdom are worth Googling to see what their polar bear trips are. The thing is, they're never easy. They're not easy. They're weather dependent, they're ice dependent. There's not very many of them, and to actually see them doing something takes even more patience and more time in their company. But Arctic Kingdom do some stuff. You could also look for, you know, if you just look at polar bear tours or polar bear experiences, you'll see who's doing them, and then, you know, but there's none of them guarantee it completely, because, you know, the Arctic is changing. That's the other thing. You know. But Churchill's probably your best bet. You know. Yes.
I know it's hard to have favourites, but do you have a favourite animal or a favourite experience of the?
Well, I think you know, polar bears would be my favourite animal, because they're hard, and because, you know, I'm very lucky. I've been given 680 days to film polar bears, or just to go and look at them. And I have, unfortunately, had problems with my Apple connecting to the system, but I've got a very nice sequence of polar bears swimming, but it wouldn't play through that machine. Anyway, so polar bears, you know, they're big, sexy, and, you know, they just do such a lot of things. So they would probably be my favourite animal. And then anytime you can get in the water with a big mammal is something special. Well, in fact, with a mammal full stop is a big thing. Because the big thing with underwater is, you know, a lot of the time topside we can use long lens, we can sit in a blind trying to hide from the animal. We can use long lenses to stay away from it, but you don't have that option underwater. You know, you don't film from less than 1/3 of the distance you can see, any more than 1/3 of the distance. So if you've got underwater visibility of 75 feet, let's say, then an animal at 75 feet is just a fuzzy shape. You want it 25 feet before it's really worth filming. And at 25 feet, you can't hide from the animal. So it's all about having time and patience and being relaxed in the water. And of course, depending on what you're filming, a dolphin will have you sussed from 100 yards away before you've seen it. You know, they buzz you with a sonar, and they can tell whether you're, if you want to get a good experience with dolphins, go in the water with a pregnant diver, because they know a pregnant diver, and they will be attracted. They'll come in and they'll buzz it, and they'll be more interested in the pregnant person than in you. But they can buzz you, and they know what's going through your head. And by that I mean, they can tell if you're excited. And if you're too excited, just like you wouldn't choose to spend the company of somebody who's all jittery, and you know, you'd go and look for somebody nice and quiet. So if you try too hard to get the dolphins, you're minimising your chances. You've got to go in and think nice, calmer thoughts, and you know, maybe they'll come and see you. And then when you see them first, just let them hang out there. Let them hang out there without looking at them. It's a little bit like David Attenborough, you know, when he did the gorillas, he was told what you have to do if you want to get close to these gorillas is you've got to let them see you, and then just start chewing the leaves, doing things like that, and they'll come in and that's how you got them so close. And it's kind of like that with whales. You know? So big whales and polar bears are probably the two unbearable experiences. I don't know whether it's still possible how possible it is now, what the rules are about swimming with manatees in Florida, but that's a great experience in January. You know, they're big mammals and they're really approachable. And I don't know, I haven't been there for 10 or 15 years, but it used to be that, you know, you could let them come up to you, and you were actually almost encouraged. If they come close, you said, it's because it wants a scratch, and you could give them a scratch. I don't know if you can still do that, but manatees are great. You know, go to Crystal River, go to a place called Crystal River, go to a company called Birds Underwater, and take the early morning one. Don't go on the later trip, take the early morning one, because by the early morning one, they're just coming out of their sanctuary areas, and they'll pause with the people in the water before they head off to their feeding areas. Later on, you've got to go and find them in their feeding areas, which is, the viz usually isn't so good, and they're a bit less approachable. So go for Birds Underwater and go first thing in the morning.
Have you ever seen a whale shark?
Yeah, I've seen whale sharks. Yeah, there's a place called Cenderawasih Bay, which is in Indonesia, where the whale sharks are great. They do this fishing overnight in Cenderawasih Bay. The ships go out for several days at a time, and they anchor fore and aft, and then they put these big pontoons out the side, and they hang a big net underneath the boat, which is much wider than the boat, and they have lights, and they put lights down into the water, and the fish come in, and the fish basically come and hang underneath the lights above the net, and then they lift the net, scoop the fish up, and then in a good night they might get 4 or 5 lifts. And in the morning they sort out their catch between the ones they want and the bycatch, and they toss the bycatch over, and the whale sharks know to come in, and they come in and they sit underneath the boat with their mouths open, and the fish just get locked in their mouth. So they're very easy to film. It's a nice little sequence of this relationship, because the fishermen actually think it's good luck to have the whale sharks around. And then once they've finished feeding, the whale sharks go off and they will do a bit of normal feeding around about. But we were doing a sequence of this human whale shark interaction, which was a nice little thing to do. And there's, I mean, literally they will make, when you go in, I've got a selfie of me holding a GoPro up, and I'm looking up, and the whale shark is just behind me with his mouth open like this. And I've got it. So that's pretty good. But there are other places that I think they're also fairly dependable, but they're particularly dependable in Cenderawasih because you've got this point, a boat where they will come to. So yeah, they're cool. Right, well, thank you all very much for coming and thank you for asking such interesting questions. Thank you.